The information and recommendations outlined in this presentation are not intended as a substitute for personal medical advice. The presentation proposes certain theoretical methods of nutrition not necessarily mainstream. It is left to the discretion and it is the sole responsibility of the user of this information to determine if procedures and recommendations described are appropriate for a patient. Neither the authors nor the sponsors of this CD can be held responsible for the information or any inadvertent errors or omissions. This information should not be construed as a claim or representation that any procedure or product mentioned constitutes a specific cure. Statements and health claims regarding products in this CD series have not been evaluated by the FDA. Products mentioned in this presentation are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent disease.
Okay, you guys, this is a very important topic. This could be one of the most important topics that we've ever presented, and this is actually one of the topics I'm most excited to share with everyone. You know, one of the things that the way my life works is I lecture and teach and treat patients one week, and the other week I just do research and write. So I have this off one week, and the weeks that I write and do research is actually, they're the grueling weeks. Wake up early, go to bed late, you know. And it's kind of like I call it, I got to go in the cave. And usually that week I end up growing a beard, and I just don't talk to anyone, and I'm just in my mode to do things. And there's about a 2-year gap between where we learn information and by the time we present information, because we have to look at these things, do some clinical evaluations, do it in practice, share with other practitioners, see how it works, and then we're able to actually commit and share it to people at seminars. Now, this is a really important concept, and this is something that we have to critically analyze for a second about how we treat autoimmune diseases and conditions. You know, the basic model of treating autoimmune disease in alternative medicine is very simple. Something like get a person's heavy metals out, find the parasite, find the antigen that's triggering it, and there's this goal and there's this theory that if they can get the metals out and if they can get rid of the antigen, whatever the antigen may be, that maybe, if they're lucky, the autoimmune disease itself may modulate, and then they may have less flare-ups. And this is one way of approaching this condition. This is a very common way. This is the classic naturopathic medicine model way of looking at autoimmune disease. And what I want to share with you is maybe a different approach. Instead of hoping these things will modulate it, why don't we understand what causes autoimmune flare-ups? What's the immunology of autoimmune flare-ups? What's the immunology of people progressing from one tissue to another tissue? What's the actual immunology for recovery? What's the immunology for development of an autoimmune disease? Because we can't look at this from an immune model instead of making this big leap, and then we can measure some of these things through labs as we look at these different types of immune responses, and then we can be able to do intervention that's very specific to modulation, right? So this is one of the things I want to clarify. There's a big difference between modulation and trying to get rid of an antigen hoping there's modulation, right? That you can actually go in there and try to modulate the system on its own. Now, there's also something that I want to make sure everyone's clear with. When you look at autoimmune diseases today, and you look at how it's being addressed and how it's being diagnosed, an autoimmune disease won't be diagnosed until the tissue is destroyed. That's the standard of care. The standard of care is you don't really look for autoimmune reactions. You just wait for the immune system to totally destroy the tissue, and then you can name it. So there's a big difference between what we call an autoimmune reaction and an autoimmune disease. So what happens to most people is they don't have an autoimmune disease develop overnight, that they actually have an autoimmune reaction that starts first. That at some point in their lifespan, their immune system starts attacking self-tissue. And then when the immune system starts attacking self-tissue, over a period of time, enough of that tissue will get destroyed where the person has an autoimmune disease. So they may have their thyroid slowly attacked and develop Hashimoto's hypothyroidism. They may have their adrenal glands attacked over a period of time and develop Addison's disease. They may have their cartilage attacked over a period of time and develop rheumatoid arthritis. They may have their myelin attacked at some point and then get these plaquing that becomes diagnosed as MS. So these reactions take place for years and years, but they're totally ignored, and there's no attention placed on it until the person actually has permanent damage and deterioration to that tissue. So this is a serious issue because we have all these people that are chronically ill that are really suffering. You could have a person that has constant joint inflammation and swelling because they have cartilage antibodies, but they won't care in the current model until there's such deformity that they can basically call it RA. You know, this is sad. You have people guaranteed out there that have like rundown, fatigue, exhaustion, this chronic functional adrenal imbalance. They're getting no support with adrenal gland nutritional support, and they have adrenal antibodies, but they haven't totally destroyed their adrenal glands yet, so they don't have Addison's. So those people get ignored, right? So one of the things that we know is we have an explosion of autoimmune diseases, and we have all these autoimmune reaction people that totally get ignored in the healthcare system, and there's no attention placed upon them until they have the tissue destruction. Now, in the current literature, what we're seeing is things come out such as if individuals start showing islet cell antibodies, without question, in a few years, they will be type 1 diabetic. So there's people that may be in this transitional stage of having islet cell antibodies. They have all these blood sugar fluctuations up and down. They're not diabetic yet, but they're heading that way. And the literature is clear for sure that they will end up with type 1 insulin dependence if they have those antibodies at some point. The same has been published with thyroid antibodies, with the thyroid. People that have thyroid antibodies, for sure, indeed, in the future, they will have hypothyroidism. So we know that these antibodies are not just there for no reason, that the immunology literature is clearly showing that this is one of the earliest signs of autoimmunity. It's not an autoimmune disease, but it is an autoimmune reaction. Now, since we live in the world of the ICD-9 code, that we live in the world of having to name the disease before you do anything, these people that have autoimmune reactions just suffer. Okay? Now, I will tell you that many people have autoimmune reactions and many people have autoimmune diseases. Just even in a room like this, I guarantee you every single row has probably an autoimmune disease. And for sure, there's many people in this row that have autoimmune reactions. And this is there, and and you guys are the healthy ones. You guys are the ones that are doing all the right things. Well, the people that are eating like ho-hos and ding-dongs and corn syrup all day and all these things, they're really in bad shape, and they have no understanding of how severe these things could be. But as they develop these autoimmune reactions, they have basically no attention given to them. Now, if you look at people that have autoimmune reactions, they have great suffering, but there's no treatment for them. And what's really interesting is besides the development of autoimmune diseases, we know that autoimmune reactions lead to many common disorders in the healthcare system. For example, they're now documenting infertility, chronic infertility is many times evident with ovarian antibodies, estrogen antibodies, that these females have difficulty getting pregnant because there's an autoimmune reaction, right? Guys, what's the ICD-9 code for estrogen antibodies? There isn't one, okay? I know in my practice in the past, when I was able to test some of these more exotic antibodies with immunosciences, we used to be able to check multiple tissue antibodies, and some of the most complex bipolar disorder people, some of the most complex mentally imbalanced people actually had antibodies to their serotonin, they had antibodies to acetylcholine. I saw half of my Parkinson's patients with dopamine antibodies. So this was like this whole autoimmune reaction thing is very real, and the literature is really starting to accept this more. Now, one of the things that we know is that people that have autoimmune reactions have no hope in the current conventional healthcare system because there's no treatment for them, right? For autoimmune disease, you basically get steroids. First line of therapy, they give steroids. Now they're using some types of treatments like naltrexone to give them opioid type of stimulation. But for the most part, there isn't much offered to them. And these people that have autoimmune reactions, they have absolutely no conventional support. So, for example, if you have a person that has several tissue antibodies, one of the things that they're going to probably happen to them if they walk in the healthcare system is, the conventionally trained physician will probably look at these antibodies and go, well, so what? And even if it is significant, we have nothing to offer you. That there's no treatment at that point. It wouldn't be considered appropriate to give this person heavy steroids to totally shut down their immune system, because that will cause things like osteoporosis and accelerated neurodegeneration, and it has lots of immune suppressive impacts. It's people more prone to just general infection. So they're not going to jump into giving these people steroids. So the current model is if someone walks in with, let's say, tissue antibodies that are positive, it's like, well, it doesn't mean anything, and we'll just wait for your tissue to deteriorate. Once it's deteriorated and totally destroyed, then we can name it. And then once we name it, we'll give you steroids. And this is pretty sad, right? Now, one of the things we also know is when we look at what the healthcare system is doing and what the research is publishing in the immunology world, is that many people have autoimmune diseases, but it's not exclusive to just that tissue. That in fact, that many people that have autoimmune diseases really have multiple autoimmunity. Now, conventionally, one of the things that's most well known about is these polyendocrine autoimmune disorders. That's when they have like Addison's disease and type 1 diabetes and hypothyroid Hashimoto's, and they have like these 3 endocrine autoimmune diseases all together. That's for the extent of most people really thinking about in the conventional model of these polyendocrine disorders. But I will tell you without question, there's polyautoimmunity with most people that have autoimmunity. That if you were to look at multiple tissues, you would see these types of changes. Now, one of the things that I'm very, very excited about is this lab called Cyrex, C-Y-R-E-X, Cyrex Laboratory, and they've been working on this 96 tissue antibody, and it's going to be released any second now. But this 96 tissue antibody profile is going to change everything for us in the healthcare system. And one of the things that it can do for us is it can actually help us identify autoimmunity earlier. And the man that was most responsible for this profile was Aristo Vijdani. He's the person who developed this. Aristo Vijdani is a good friend of mine who wrote the foreword to my thyroid book. And he's just a world-class immunologist. And he's published a couple hundred papers on autoimmune diseases, and this is his passion. And one of the things he did is he called these 96 tissue antibody profiles predictive antibody array. Meaning that if you have an antibody response, a reaction, autoimmune reaction to a tissue, it's predicting that this system may potentially deteriorate on you. Especially if you have a constant immune activation, immune dysregulation, inflammation, that this system may dysregulate with you. Now, if a person, for example, starts showing acetylcholine antibodies and myelin antibodies, you would know that they're going to have increased risk for things like Alzheimer's and dementias. So what would you do if you knew that? Maybe you would do intervention to have support to brain and do support that can help the acetylcholine levels and really try to keep the brain active and do brain exercise and keep their system preventing this type of disorder. If someone had cartilage antibodies, you may start initiating therapies to enhance their cartilage synthesis and anti-inflammatory effects, so they may not end up with the full-blown autoimmune disease, right? So I think that the future of how we look at autoimmune diseases is rapidly changing. It's obviously going to change with people like us that are kind of on the forefront of looking at the literature and then trying to intervene and do things that are appropriate. But looking at 96 tissue antibodies is going to be a profound thing. And guys, I will guarantee you, if you guys see a person with an autoimmune disease and you did a 96 tissue antibody array panel, you would probably find autoimmune reactions to multiple tissues. Right? And here's the thing. You might find they have 6 tissue antibodies. So here's a scenario. They have antibodies against their thyroid, their hypothyroid. They have antibodies to their cartilage. They have antibodies to their islet cells. They have antibodies to their skin epithelium. That's why they have skin outbreaks and psoriasis. That's this year. Next year you check them, 5 other tissue antibodies show. 3 years later, 5 other tissue antibodies show. So then you see this progression of these autoimmune reactions, right? And we classically like to look at these as like SLE or lupus, but they're not. These are not the full-blown autoimmune disease. They don't fit the SLE subclass, but these people have inflammatory, destructive process and deterioration of their bodily tissues. Does that make sense? Okay. Because I have a little girl. She's 4 years old. She'll be 5 in January. I look at her every day and I go, what autoimmune disease is she going to get? You know, that I'm thinking that she's going to get an autoimmune disease based on where we're going, based on how we're manipulating our food supply, based on the environmental compounds that are there, that there's going to be this explosion of autoimmune reactions, and what is she going to end up with? Because she's only 4. You know, what's going to happen by the time she's 40? What's going to happen by the time she's 50? You know, maybe what's going to happen by the time she's 15? I don't know. So, you know, I'm constantly thinking about what are all the mechanisms for autoimmunity? What are the things that actually determine this turning on of the body not being able to recognize self from non-self? This is very serious stuff, right? And you guys, many of you will develop autoimmune diseases if you don't have one already. Many of you definitely will have autoimmune reactions at some point in your lifespan. Make sense? There was a study done a few years ago. It was done at the University of Milan. They looked at individuals that were able to age above 100, okay? They did all these biomarkers. The one thing they found consistent between all these people that were able to reach an age above 100 was they had no tissue antibodies, that they actually didn't develop the autoimmunity. They didn't have, it's not actually autoimmune disease, but didn't have any autoimmune reaction. So this is like a really critical thing. So what will determine what we have, an autoimmune reaction or not have autoimmune reaction, right? Really, really critical stuff. What do you do with the person that has the autoimmune disease? how do you modulate the system? What are the things that you want to do? So this is like where we need to really focus in and get into. Now, we're going to be eventually doing a full weekend course on autoimmune disease. You have these 10-part, 2-hour series. And, I was just thinking this morning, we can't do 10. We have to do 20. Because we're not going to get the information down by 10. So this 10 might turn into 20. So this is session 2. We'll probably have 11, 12, 13, 14, and we just have to really kind of update the literature, what's going on. Now, my frustration with the field of nutrition is that we do too much folklore nutrition, right? It's almost like folklore. This is what you do for an autoimmune disease. This is how people have done it since forever. We do very simple types of protocols. We don't actually, very few of us in the field of nutrition are really looking at the literature, doing an intervention, looking at the research, the recent studies. I'm going to show you a bunch of studies today. You're going to see most of these papers are from the past 2 years. That these aren't studies from 1970. That the current understanding application of autoimmune modulation is really exploded, and we can do things that have a profound impact. Now, getting into your first slide here, this is basic slide, autoimmune disease in the United States. First of all, we know they're increasing every year. Most of these autoimmune diseases are increasing in prevalence every year. Most cases are not diagnosed. There's a major gap in time from when they have severe suffering before they get diagnosed, and that's for the conventional disease. Autoimmune reactions, for sure, are not being assessed, diagnosed in the current healthcare system. Because insurance companies don't like to pay for antibodies predictively. Insurance companies don't have that as part of their model. Right? This whole concept of looking at autoimmune reactions before autoimmune disease is not even part of the radar of the world of what's accepted in the insurance-based model. Okay, so we have that. Most people that have an autoimmune disease will progress and deteriorate. That there's this constant deterioration with autoimmunity. We also know that the conventional healthcare has very little to offer besides steroids and some recent new class of opioid drugs. And then conventional alternative healthcares may have not really fully understand autoimmunity. So here's the thing. When you go to most healthcare practitioners, it doesn't matter what their background is. They could be a physician, internist, they could be a naturopath, they could be an acupuncturist, they could be a chiropractor, they could be a nutritionist, they could be endocrinologist, that there's actually very, very poor understanding of immunology, and there's very little understanding of autoimmune physiology. And with that lack of understanding, there's only some degree of intervention they can employ because they just don't get it, okay? Now, when you look at autoimmune disease people, these people are difficult. There's no joke that these people can be flared up with many of the things that we do in natural medicine. Now, there's some characteristic things with autoimmune people. Majority of them have really compromised leaky gut barrier issues. So they have extreme sensitivity to multiple foods. They have extreme sensitivity to supplements. So these are the ones that always are having trouble going on any kind of nutritional supplemental protocol or dietary protocol because this whole barrier system is usually compromised with the autoimmune group. We know that autoimmune diseases tend to have a polarity of their immune system. So we know that there's a T helper 1 system, a T cell system, and TH system, B cell system. And usually there's a dominance in one side, and supplements can make them worse if they're going the wrong way. We know that TH1 stimulating supplements like astragalus, echinacea, maitake mushrooms can actually flare up a TH1-based autoimmune response. And then we know that supplements like like green tea flavonoids or grapeseed extract or pine bark extract or the flavonoids in dark chocolate or the flavonoids in coffee, they can actually stimulate the Th2 side. So when you take a person who is like very sensitive for their autoimmunity to things that can trigger their immune response and have gut barrier system compromises and multiple tissue attacks, many times you see these autoimmune reaction people, autoimmune disease people actually getting worse when they work with alternative healthcare people. They hear things like, oh my God, I saw this person, they almost killed me. What they do, they let me take this supplement and I was down for days and I couldn't function, and you see these types of things. So guys, this population is going to get much larger, and you as a clinician have to be able to understand the pathophysiology here, or you're just not going to be able to serve them, right? They're going to be flared up, and it's going to be very complex, and our need as healthcare practitioners to meet the demands of the chronic disease is really going to be based on understanding autoimmune reactions and autoimmunity and what things can modulate them and the things that they need. Now, what I want to really get into is autoimmune physiology. And this is a diagram I want to share with you. And I want to tell you how we can manipulate this diagram. Guys, you see the slide? This is like 2 years of my life right here. Oh, quick little slide. There's been a lot of time invested in this. Okay? So let me just share some insights here. Okay. Now, one of the things that we know is when you look at the literature, that there's bits and pieces of this stuff, but they're not really all put together. That you have to kind of look at it and understand one concept and read another paper, and then eventually you start gluing these things together, and then you can see, what's really the big picture. What are the things that we're really trying to do for autoimmune modulation? Now, we know that the intestinal membrane or mucosal immunity is really critical, that many of these autoimmune people have mucosal membrane, these types of disorders. Many of them have chronic leaky gut issues. We do have a more detailed talk on chronic leaky gut syndromes called the Neuroendocrinology of Leaky Gut coming up in our 10-part series. I'm really excited about that one. But we know we have this whole gut membrane issue. And again, the leaky gut concept has been around in alternative medicine for a long time, but it wasn't really accepted. If you look at the literature the past 5 years, there's many, many papers now that are recognizing intestinal membrane compromise, leaky gut, as definitely a trigger for autoimmunity and chronic inflammatory responses, that this has now gone from the alternative theory into the conventional immunological literature, and it's now at the point where it is accepted as a mechanism of dysfunction and promotion of inflammation and autoimmunity. Really, really fascinating stuff. I'll show you guys some of those papers in our leaky gut 2-hour presentation coming up. Okay. Now, we also know that antigens can sometimes trigger immune responses. We know several different antigens have been shown to trigger different autoimmune diseases. We know that haptens, environmental compounds, have been shown to trigger autoimmune diseases. This is in the conventional literature. But once the autoimmune disease turns on, it's on. And sometimes what turns on the autoimmune disease isn't an environmental compound or an antigen. One of the things that is a major trigger for autoimmune development is pregnancy. Many people will develop their autoimmune disease after pregnancy. During pregnancy, the third trimester, their Th2 system is dominant, and postpartum, their Th1 system is dominant. And many times that's the trigger. So if you're the person trying to find the cause for the autoimmunity and they're no longer pregnant, what are you going to do? So one of the things that I want to encourage you is maybe not spend all the time trying to find that antigen or that compound that may have triggered it, that you may just want to immediately try to modulate what's in front of you, decrease their autoimmunity if you can, help them recover better, look at these different mechanisms. So let's get into this Th1, Th2 system. So this is an area many of you are familiar with, some of you may not be familiar with. But the Th1, Th2 system is basically the basic immune response. You have two parts of the immune response. And you guys may have learned this in school as Th1 as a cell-mediated response and Th2 as a humoral antibody response. Okay? Now, the Th1 response is the initial T cell response. So if your body is fighting some kind of infection, some kind of antigen, you're eventually going to have your natural killer cells and cytotoxic T cells as an attempt to destroy this. Now, your Th2 system kicks in to make antibodies to help find the antigen much more efficiently, and these systems work together. And when you look at people that don't have an autoimmune disease, their Th1, Th2 systems are pretty well balanced with each other. There could be a little bit of elevation of one versus the other at certain times, but it's not major. Now, when you look at autoimmune diseases, there's a significant polarity between their Th1 system, significant polarity between their Th2 system, that their immune system is much different than a person without an autoimmune disease. And in the conventional immunology literature, they're classifying many autoimmune diseases as Th1 or Th2 dominant. Now, here's the thing. There's really no correlation with an autoimmune disease always being Th1 or Th2. For example, most Graves people are Th2. There are some Th1 people in that group. Okay? We know that a lot of type 1 diabetes are Th1 dominant, but some are Th2. Right? So they go back and forth. Most Hashimoto's is Th1, but there's also Th2 in that group too. So there isn't a specific specificity for an autoimmune disease being always Th1 or Th2 dominant. Now, this is really important to us because we know that certain supplements may push the Th1, Th2 system, and I don't want to really get into that with great detail. We've covered that so many times in the past with our talks, but if you guys missed some of that, we have a 2-hour CD called Autoimmune Physiology. We really get into this whole Th1, Th2 model and talk about supplements that have been shown to trigger one side versus the other. But I do want to explain about how this relates to modulation. So here's the thing. A person that has an autoimmune disease, for reasons we're still learning, shifts into a Th1 or a Th2 issue. We know that there's a genotype susceptibility for these autoimmune diseases. We know that many of these autoimmune diseases are more common in females and males, right? There's some that are equal, like autoimmune diabetes is equal in males and females. Hashimoto's hypothyroid is 24 females to 1 male, but there's a greater tendency for females, so there could be some gender influences as well. But we know that at some point, something activates, turns on the gene expression to an autoimmune phenotype. And when this autoimmune disease develops, that there's this Th1 or Th2 issue. Now, what that's going to do itself is it's going to release cytokines. And these cytokine elevations activate immune processes that then promote some type of tissue destruction, okay? And we'll get into the specific mechanisms, but as a person develops their Th1 or Th2 dominance, the greater it becomes, the more cytokine activity they have, right? And that cytokine activity they have then promotes some aspects of the immune system for tissue destruction, so, so Th1, Th2. Now, one of the things that we know is this Th1, Th2 system promotes cytokines which promote the destructive process, but what really adds fuel to the fire, what really determines the severity of the autoimmune destruction process is this co-activation with Th17. And if the Th17 system, this is another part of the immune system, is activated, then we have dramatic destruction of tissue. Okay? And T helper 17 produces a cytokine called interleukin 17. And then these cytokine surges then promote destructive processes. Now, one of the destructive processes they're going to promote, which we're going to repeat and go over several times before we end up today, is they're going to activate what's called cytokine-inducible nitric oxide synthase. Cytokine-inducible nitric oxide synthase, also known as INOS. Okay, cytokine-inducible nitric oxide synthase. And this is going to then produce the inflammatory destructive process. So here's the thing. When you have a Th1, Th2 dominance, you have a cytokine surge. Those cytokine surges from the Th1, Th2 dominance activate cytokine-inducible nitric oxide synthase, so there's greater destruction. If IL-17 is high, it profoundly activates cytokine-inducible nitric oxide synthase, so you have the severe destructive process. Okay? So one of the things that immunologists are seeing is that if this Th17 system is active, there's going to be major destructive processes than if it's not active. I mean, there will be some destruction from the Th1, Th2 dominance, but this Th17 adds dramatic fuel to the fire of their tissue destructive process. Does that make sense? And this is really important for us because we're going to talk about how these things can be modulated as we get into this, right? Now, then you have the Th3 cell. We didn't go over that yet, the Th3 cell. The Th3 cell is known as the regulatory T cell, the regulatory T cell. And one of the things that the regulatory T cell will do is it'll balance out Th1, Th2 dominances. That one of the roles of the regulatory T cell is to dampen this polarity of this Th1, Th2 system, right? Now, with many autoimmune disease people, this regulatory T cell system is failing. That's one of the reasons they have such dominance, okay? So that's kind of the basic concept of what we know is happening with autoimmune disease physiology. So here's the key concept. If a person has an autoimmune disease, several things are going to be a factor for their degree of flare-up and destruction and maybe even promotion to other tissues. Their intestinal membrane mucosal health is very critical. Their Th1, Th2 polarity, how polar it is very significant because the more polar it is, the more cytokine it releases to activate the INOS system, the cytokine-inducible nitric oxide system. Their degree of fitness of their regulatory T cells is absolutely critical because that dampens this Th1, Th2 response. And then their Th17 activity is really critical because the more active that is, the more tissue destruction that you get. Does that make sense? Okay, so here's the thing. Here's what you'll see with autoimmune disease people. High Th17 activity, low Th3 activity, right? And the dominance of their Th1 or Th2 system in one way or the other. Now, if you look at if you just sit back and go, okay, this person in front of me has an autoimmune disease. How can I improve their function? How could I dampen their destructive process? How could I slow down their deterioration? What things can I do to help their recovery? What would that be? Make sure the gut mucosal membrane is healthy, as fit as it can be, which we'll get into some studies in that. Make sure that their Th1, Th2 is not really polar, that you calm it down. Make sure their Th3 system is really, really fit. And make sure their Th17 system is dampened. Does that make sense? That's the basic concept. And this is the way we break down autoimmune disease. We don't go, okay, where's that parasite? Where's that metal? We're like, you know what? We have to modulate your autoimmunity. And then you guys, in future 2-hour talks, we're going to really get into specific laboratory markers for each of these systems. That you can actually measure the Th17 system with things like interleukin 17. You can measure regulatory T cells with the CD25, CD4 cluster proteins and tissue growth factor. Those things can be very useful to us. But right now, I just want to go over the concepts, and this is kind of like a way as we get into other course materials. Now, one of the topics of today, the topic of today is autoimmune modulation by the glutathione system, right? So here's the question. How do you modulate the system? And obviously, one of the ways you can modulate the system is glutathione. So I want to talk to you guys about this, and this is really critical. Now, one of the things that we know is that glutathione itself is one of the key triggers, one of the gating mechanisms for a person to have the expression of flare-ups and autoimmunity. So here's one of these papers. We suppose this is the paper that was published in 2009 in Environmental Toxicology, and the researchers conclude that the immune toxicity led to glutathione depletion and finally led to apoptosis, probably via changing the expression of IONS in human T lymphocytes. Let me skip to this here. So one of the things they found is this. We know that when we have an environmental toxicity, for example, it may trigger an autoimmune disease, but we have this glutathione system, and there's GSH, which is reduced glutathione, and GSHC, which is oxidized glutathione. And if we have GSH, reduced glutathione, this can take the blow. So if you have, for example, environmental toxicity, it can take the bullet for that environmental exposure, and if that happens, there's no inflammatory immune response. If this system is failing and glutathione systems get depleted, then you have major promotion and activity of this destructive process. So here's one of these other studies. These results suggest that TBT, an environmental pollutant, selectively induces apoptosis and T helper polarity via generation of hydrogen peroxide because of low glutathione levels. So this is what researchers are finding. So an environmental compound activates the immune system only after glutathione levels are depleted. Pretty fascinating stuff. This is what they're finding in the world of research in toxicology. So here's the thing. Many people we know have autoimmune disease flared up because of environmental component, right? Now, let's say you had high amounts of benzene rings in your body. Okay, let's just say you have high amounts of an environmental pollutant, whether it's formaldehyde or benzene rings or something, okay? You had that in your body. If your glutathione systems are healthy, based on what we understand, it can keep quenching this so there's no immune activation, immune inflammatory response. Meaning this, you guys all have seen people with heavy metal challenges and push the challenge, these DMSA challenge tests and things like that. Well, you see most people have metals, but not most people have autoimmunity or flare-ups. So one of the things we know that will determine if an environmental compound will actually trigger their autoimmunity is their health of their glutathione system, their health of their glutathione recycling system. And you may have, let's say, formaldehyde in your body now, it's no big deal, but something happens in your life and your glutathione levels get depleted. Maybe you get chronically stressed out, maybe you start becoming a binge alcoholic, who knows what. Something happens, those things happen in combination, your glutathione recycling system is now not there for you. The environmental compounds you got exposed to years ago now take their toll, and now you have this autoimmune disease expression, right? That could be a possible model for some of these developments based on our current understanding. So think about this. A lot of people are treating autoimmune diseases with heavy metal detox. What if their glutathione system is not fit and they start doing heavy metal chelation? Devastating. These people get sicker, Because I have seen so many people fall apart with chelation therapy. And what's the excuse? Oh, they're detoxing. Really? Is that all you can say? They're detoxing? Maybe you're flaring it up. Maybe that this is not just a detox issue. Maybe you're actually aggravating their autoimmunity. Because I have directly seen people do chelation have their autoimmune disease explode. And I think most of you guys have seen those types of things too. That just getting these metals out by itself is not always the smartest idea, that you have to have some degree of fitness and integrity to look at this system. So here's a basic question. How important is glutathione maintenance with those with environmental induced autoimmunity? How important is this glutathione recycling system with people that have multiple chemical sensitivities? You guys, it's absolutely critical. How devastating would chelation therapy be with individuals who have low glutathione status? You guys, it would be devastating. Right? Now, I look at my daughter, like I was telling him, what autoimmune disease she can develop. How can I prevent the system for her? Well, I got to make sure her glutathione recycling system is as fit as possible. Does that make sense? That I do everything I can to intervene to make sure that system is working to its peak. So if she does get the environmental exposure she's going to get, which is only going to get worse in her generation than our generation, that she has the defense system intact so she can deal with it. If I have a current patient with an autoimmune disease, I really want to make sure the system is really important, is really there for them. Because these haptens, these environmental compounds, really don't have their effect on the immune system until this gating, taking the bullet glutathione system is compromised, and there's glutathione depletion. Okay? Now, we also know that glutathione has profound impacts on regulatory T cells, Th3 cells. So they help balance this Th1, Th2 system. So these things are really critical. So let's go into the glutathione physiology system. Let's talk about the mechanisms. Now, you guys, we know that oral glutathione just doesn't really work. Oral glutathione has some influence on maybe some gut, but doesn't really get past the gut mucosa. We know that glutathione IVs can be used. Those are really great for lots of neurological disorders. Some research is really showing very promising effects with Parkinson's disease. We know that Apex has like this product called Oxide, which is a glutathione cream that's rubbed into tissues. But those systems are not raising or helping the recycling system of glutathione. That the ability for glutathione to recycle from reduced to oxidized glutathione, it's its own separate thing. That if you give someone an exposure to glutathione, whether it's IV or a topical cream or a glutathione nebulizer, you have that antioxidant there for a little bit, but you don't really have this constant recycling fitness of this body, and you don't have these intracellular glutathione levels raised on their own. Does that make sense? So there's a difference between just glutathione therapy and actually enhancing glutathione recycling. That's the key thing, okay? Now, we know that glutathione itself is a tripeptide compound, gamma-glomatylcysteine glycine, that acts as an immune modulator, antioxidant, and helps with detoxification. And it's the main protecting antioxidant for the mitochondria. So just in general, like any type of degenerative process is going to have its effect when it destroys the cell's mitochondria and nucleus, and glutathione is one of the key antioxidants for that. Now, when you look at glutathione, as you understand this concept of recycling, which is really critical, is you just need to remember that there's reduced glutathione and oxidized glutathione, right? Reduced glutathione, GSH, is there to take the blow. It's going to take the bullet. Once it takes the bullet and gets damaged, it'll become oxidized glutathione, which is GSSG, right? And GSH is oxidized, reduced glutathione is oxidized to oxidized glutathione by glutathione peroxidase, this oxidase enzyme. And glutathione can be regenerated from GSSG by the enzyme glutathione reductase, right? So what's the goal? What do we want to have high amounts of? We want to have high amounts of GSH, right? Reduced glutathione. And we want to have very high activity of glutathione reductase so we can regenerate this back in our system. Now, what we know is during oxidative stress, reduced glutathione is being converted to oxidized glutathione by glutathione peroxidase to protect and quench oxidation inflammation, and then oxidized glutathione must be recycled back to glutathione by glutathione reductase to keep the cycle going. The ability to activate glutathione peroxidase and recycle it back to GSH is absolutely critical for autoimmunity. Does that make sense to you guys? So here's the thing. It's not that you just take an IV injection of glutathione, which has some benefit to some people, but the ability to make this system fit, the ability to have activation of this glutathione reductase system to constantly be able to take oxidized glutathione and convert it back into glutathione to keep taking the blow from environmental types of compounds or any other inflammatory response. And we know that if this system is fit, that we can potentially decrease the trigger of environmental-based autoimmunity, that we can actually increase the regulatory T cells, which help this Th1, Th2 system. So it's very unique in itself. So here's a diagram illustrating the cycle, and you guys can see this glutathione being, let's say, attacked, destroyed, and then it gets converted to oxidized glutathione. But this system is what we need to really look at. Now, what I want to share with you guys is compounds that have been published in the literature to do exactly that. There are actually botanicals, compounds, and cofactors that really help activate glutathione reductase so we can increase this cycle so it can recycle itself. So once this inflammatory response happens, we can engage in therapies to make this reduced glutathione recycle back so we can deal with the inflammatory destructive issue. Does that make sense? And this is very useful whether they're Th1 or Th2 dominant. Now let me show you some of these studies on this. So here's these studies. And what these studies are going to show you is this direct correlation with this glutathione recycling system failing and what happens to their autoimmune disease, right? It's like its own separate thing that we really haven't gone into great detail in our past education. So here's one of these papers. This was published in 2008. And then here's the title of the paper: Correlation of Lipid Peroxidation and Glutathione Levels with Severity of Systemic Lupus Erythematosus, a pilot study for the single center. Guys, SLE is one of the ugliest, most difficult autoimmune diseases to ever deal with. So these researchers found, they concluded, a significant correlation between plasma glutathione and SLE severity exists that may aid evaluation of the disease severity and usefulness of the management of SLE. Guys, they found really simply, when their glutathione levels dropped, their SLE flared up. And the ones that had the most severe SLE flare-ups had the least amount of glutathione activity. The ones had the greatest protection and decreased progression had the higher amounts of glutathione. It was directly correlated, okay? So again, once this system fails, then you trigger this whole inflammatory cascade, this whole autoimmune response, and in this case, it's been directly linked to flare-ups of SLE, okay? Here's another paper that was published in 2010 in Antioxidant Redox and Signaling Journal. These data indicate that glutathione peroxidase-dependent control of intracellular reactive oxygen species accumulation is important not only for regulation of Th cells proliferation, but also for modulation and differentiation of the Th1, Th2, and Th17 cells. That it actually helps modulate this autoimmunity of this, right? Because remember, this system, this Th1, 2, and 17 system, if it's abnormal, that's when you get these types of flare-ups. So glutathione has been shown to directly modulate the autoimmunity aspect of this, the flare-up aspect of this. This is another paper that was published in 2010 in biochemistry. It was called Redox Remodeling as an Immune Regulatory Strategy. And here's what the conclusion of the researchers. Stimulation of dendritic cells by T cells activates the NF-kappa B pathway in dendritic cells and glutathione synthesis for regulatory T cells. Regulatory T cells prevent autoimmune disease and maintain peripheral tolerance by suppressing self-reactive effector T cells. Yes, they found a direct correlation between how glutathione helps synthesize regulatory T cells, and this is really critical because the greater the person's regulatory T cell fitness, the less autoimmune reactions they have, and they actually found that this may be a preventative model for autoimmune disease. Right? Pretty profound stuff. Okay? Here's another paper. This was published in 2009 in National Chemistry and Biology, Extracellular Redox Modulation by Regulatory T Cells. Conclusion: we demonstrate that the mechanism of redox remodeling during mouse T cell activation involves secretion of glutathione by dendritic cells, which represents a previously unrecognized module for immune T cell modulation. This is another paper published in 2006, Currents in Medical Chemistry. Accumulating evidence suggests that intracellular glutathione levels in antigen-presenting cells, such as macrophages, influence the Th1, Th2 cytokine response. The observations reported herein show that pro-glutathione molecules represent new therapeutic agents to support immune modulation. And guys, here's the key word: immune modulation. Not Th1 enhancing, not Th2 enhancing, but modulating, right? Decreasing the inflammatory autoimmunity of the reaction. This was another paper that was published in 2009, titled the paper Intestinal Barrier Function in Response to Abundant Depleted Mucosal Glutathione. Glutathione depletion aggravated ileal inflammation after infection. Glutathione is suggested to play an important role in gut barrier function and prevention of intestinal inflammation. What researchers are also learning is the gut's glutathione, reduced glutathione to oxidized glutathione, is what will determine if there's intestinal destruction. That if a person has, unrelated to autoimmunity, if a person has depleted reduced glutathione levels, they're going to have much more profound intestinal destruction. So remember that one of these models that we have all seen with autoimmunity is these people just have multiple food sensitivities, this leaky gut that has difficulty healing, and then there's this relationship with what's their glutathione recycling fitness. If their glutathione recycling fitness is enhanced, their Th1, 2 dominance, their Th17 activity, their gut mucosal membrane activity can all be profoundly supported, right? These are great things for us to know about. This is another paper that was published in 2002, Glutathione Catabolism, a Signaling Mechanism. Glutathione is the main intracellular thiol antioxidant and such participates in a number of cellular antitoxin defense functions. Nevertheless, non-antioxidant functions of glutathione have also been described in modulation of cell proliferation in the immune response. So again, one of the things that hopefully we can do is when we look at our autoimmune disease patients, go, what can we do to enhance their immune modulation, right? Not stimulate one side or the other, not like look for the antigen or the hapten, but what can we immediately do that can decrease their flare-ups? Now, glutathione is really critical for slowing this immune activation, but it's also very useful for helping tissues recover. Now remember, with autoimmunity, there's two issues. How bad is the tissue getting destroyed, and how fast can it recover? So if someone, how bad is their cartilage being destroyed, and how quickly can their cartilage recover and regenerate? You know, those systems are all both in play when you look at autoimmune disease. So one of the strategies that we want to do, once again, is we want to get this GSH level up, this reduced glutathione level up. We want to activate this glutathione reductase. And one of the things that we have is a formulation that was developed for this based on the literature. And this is called glutathione recycler. So the product is used to support the synthesis and recycling of glutathione, as well as to support the activation of glutathione peroxidase. We're trying to get these reduced glutathione levels up. And because if you spend some time doing a literature search, this is what you're going to find. Okay, you're going to find a bunch of these compounds that have been shown to do it, and some are profound. Now I'm going to summarize actually what some of these ingredients do, but you guys have all the abstract papers in this handout. You guys get a handout like this? You guys can look at glutathione recycler. I think there's like 86 or 50, or I don't know. There's a lot of references there. I don't want to have 50 or 80 slides for a product and just waste time with that. You guys have the actual citations there. You guys can look at the actual mechanisms. And if you guys have time, go to Medline, type in the reference, and then you can actually see the paper. And this stuff is profound, that we can actually do things to profoundly impact this glutathione recycling system from a natural medicine model. And this can be a very powerful therapeutic strategy for those that have autoimmune disease or multiple chemical sensitivities or environmental induced toxicity. This should be for sure a protocol before any chelation therapy is done to individuals to get the system healthier. Really important stuff. Now, some of the stuff is commonly known, but you need high amounts of this stuff to have an effect. And here's the thing. One of the things that you will also see is some compounds work together and synergistically involved. So N-acetylcysteine is one of them. And research has clearly demonstrated that N-acetylcysteine is rapidly metabolized to intracellular glutathione. We know that alpha-lipoic acid directly helps recycle, extends the metabolic lifespan of vitamin C, glutathione, and coenzyme Q10. It indirectly renews vitamin E, all of which are necessary for the key word, glutathione recycling, right? Glutathione recycling. L-glutamine has been shown to demonstrate that glutamine is important for generation of glutathione. It is transported into the cell, converted to glutamate, and readily available for intracellular glutathione synthesis. Selenium is the trace element nutrient that serves as the essential cofactor for enzyme glutathione peroxidase. And then cordyceps. This is one of the most powerful stuff. Okay, if you guys start looking at some papers, start reading the citations for cordyceps. I mean, this dramatically can raise glutathione recycling activity. It's been shown to activate both glutathione peroxide synthesis in the body. Cordyceps research has demonstrated it helps protect cells by engaging the glutathione enzyme cycle. And then centella is another compound. Research has clearly demonstrated that oral intake very rapidly and dramatically increases the activity and the amount of glutathione peroxidase and quantity of glutathione. This is in the cell. This is intracellular. Okay, and then we know that Sylvium administration has shown to significantly increase glutathione, increase superoxide dismutase activity, and have positive influences on the ratios of reduced and oxidized glutathione. So when these things are all given together, you have this like activation of this enzyme, the substrates, the cofactors, and these are the things that have all been shown to be the mechanism we know about currently to get this glutathione recycling system fit. Okay? Now, the summary of this is when you use these things and when you can make this cycle more fit so it can easily oxidize more glutathione, you prevent activation of ion S. This is what these research studies are showing you, but we're going to summarize them all on one slide instead of spending a lot of time going through each paper. And you guys, if you dampen the ion OS system, what happens? Well, remember that the cytokine surges in Th17 are causing their tissue destruction because they activate this cytokine-inducible nitric oxide synthase, which is a destructive pathway. So if the glutathione levels can be improved, that can directly dampen this system, dampen autoimmunity. We know this protects cells' mitochondria. We know this enhances tissue recovery. We know it modulates the Th1, Th2 polarization, which can dampen autoimmunity. We know that it's the major activator for the Th3 regulatory T cell. That's really critical for dampening autoimmunity. We know it dampens Th17, which promotes the tissue destruction. And we know it enhances tissue and intestinal cell regeneration, which helps with recovery. So this is a very critical model to look at autoimmune modulation. So again, the goal is to try to do things to increase the system. If we can get this reduced glutathione activity up, as we've seen from previous papers, then you don't have glutathione depletion. And if you don't have, and then we know that if glutathione levels are depleted, that's actually what activates the T cell response for autoimmunity and tissue destruction. So that's basically the goal of glutathione recycling. Do you guys understand? It's not glutathione, it's not oxycell, it's not the IV. It's a series of botanicals and precursors and cofactors for this enzyme to help this body become as fit as it can to increase reduced glutathione. Okay. Now I will tell you from personal experience, it is awesome for autoimmune people. And people always ask, like, what's the dose? Yes, there is no exact dose. You have to see what works for them. So one of the things that you'll do is you go just take a couple of these and increase the dose, and you're going to notice that some dose is going to make a difference for you, because that's the cool thing about this glutathione recycling system. It actually makes a noticeable subjective difference for people right away. It's not just like take this mineral because we think it's good for you. Research shows it's good for you. It's like it is noticeable with them right away. You will see some of these people, as they really start building up their glutathione recycling system, they're not as sensitive to chemicals around them. They have less flare-ups. If they have a flare-up, they recover much faster. Now, it doesn't cure anything. It just makes their system more fit. It helps them dampen some of these reactions, helps them recover faster. And yes, people are going to, once they learn how to use this product for their own specificity, they'll have doses they use when there's a severe flare-up. There's doses they use just from a daily kind of maintenance level. But it's kind of dependent upon them, that there isn't everyone takes 2 capsules a meal kind of thing. And that's how the system works. Now, the other glutathione product Apex has is called Oxycell. And this is a topical delivery cream of glutathione. It's rubbed into tissues that may have the inflammatory response. Now, if you guys have been to our thyroid courses, one of the things we do for Hashimoto's people is we have these people rub it right into their thyroid gland, into their tissue, and you get this local effect. And I think many of us have seen the same response where we see these people have thyroiditis and swelling. It just immediately comes down when they start getting that support. That's one of the most common things we hear about from all over the country. But it is very significant. People that have like joint inflammatory RA, they can rub the glutathione right into their tissue. I mean, if you rub it in the blood, you'll have some effect, but in the involved tissue itself is pretty effective. And that's not the same thing as glutathione recycling. That's just trying to get the actual glutathione into the involved tissue, right? And it's not the same thing as IV. IV will go in the bloodstream and then have its antioxidant effects for a few hours, and then it's gone. It's oxidized. It's not this recycling of the system. So they're all, in a sense, independent pathways to deal with this glutathione response. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so that's one of the first things I want to get into. There's 2 other things I want to get into before we finish up here. And this is so critical, the role of the nitric oxide system in autoimmune modulation. Okay. Now here's a question for you. Is nitric oxide activity good or bad? Both. But what is it dependent upon? Is it dependent upon the quantity? No. It's dependent upon which isomer is released. So here's what we know. There's a lot of confusion, first of all, with nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a signaling compound. But there's 3 different isomers of nitric oxide. There is INOS, which we've been talking about, cytokine-inducible nitric oxide synthase. That's the one these Th1, Th2 cytokines activate. That's the one that Th17 activates. And when INOS, inducible nitric oxide synthase, is activated, that's when you get tissue destruction. Okay? That's bad. You don't want this system elevated. This system is going nuts in autoimmune disease people. There's another nitric oxide synthase isomer, which is called ENOS, and this is great. This helps with blood flow delivery. This helps with tissue recovery. This dampens the autoimmune inflammatory reactions. So you want that system up. And then there is NNOS, and we'll go over these again. This is neuronal nitric oxide synthase, and this enhances neuronal plasticity, neuronal activation. It's a great thing for us to have activated. So it's not that nitric oxide is good or bad, it really depends on the context of the condition and what's available. But for autoimmunity in general, you really don't want to have high NOS activity. And their Th1, Th2, and Th17 is really what is pushing this pathway. You guys understand? Like you guys, the cytokines themselves don't really destroy much. They activate INOS, which causes the destruction. That's the key thing, or in other destructive systems. So this is what's been published in the literature. This was the paper that was published, Nitric oxide and experimental joint inflammation benefit or deterrent. And then here's what they found. Based on these data, it appears that the isomers of nitric oxide synthase contribute to the pathophysiology, and that induced nitric oxide synthase and nitric oxide may function in part in protective pathways, depending on which is activated. If the INOS system is activated, you get destruction. If the ENOS system is activated, you get joint healing and tissue recovery. So it's not just good or bad, it's which system is being activated. This was a continuation of the paper. Collectively, these data implicate discrete roles of NOS isoforms in the emergence of local tissue pathology and underscore the need to define the specific pathways that are being targeted. You guys, what does arginine do? Stimulates all three. If someone has INOS activity and load up on arginine, that's not good. You're going to activate their INOS system because the cytokines are already high. It could be a destructive process. And that's the key thing. You have to be specific with it. Arginine has become really trendy and popular to raise NO for cardiovascular benefits, but arginine immediately pushes all three isomers. And you have all these NO products out there, and the first ingredient is high amounts of arginine. This is insane. You can't do that. You have to have specific modulation of these isomers to have the benefit you want, which is what we're going to get into. Now, let's get into nitric oxide isomers and mechanism itself. So here's the key thing. Nitric oxide is actually gas. It's an important messenger molecule involved in many physiological and pathological processes. It plays a both destructive and protective role in autoimmunity, depending on which isomer is expressed. So this is a diagram that you guys have. It just really quickly goes over the specific nitric oxide synthase isomers and their location. So neuronal nitric oxide synthase, NNOS, is known as NOS1 and is found in nervous tissue. It's found in the microglial cells. The microglial cells surround all neurons. There's 10 microglial cells for every neuron in the central nervous system and peripheral nervous system tissue. And neuronal nitric oxide synthase is a positive thing, that this actually enhances neuronal plasticity, synaptic activity, neuronal recovery. It's a great thing for us to have activated. Then we have inducible NOS, and inducible NOS is also known as cytokine inducible NOS. This is where these Th1, Th2, and 17 pathways trigger, and this inducible NOS is known as INOS or NOS2, and that's found in the immune system. Because all of the different cells in the immune system all throughout the body have this INOS system. Then you have endothelial nitric oxide synthase, and it's ENOS, and it's NOS3, and that's found in the vascular endothelium of blood vessels. Okay? Now, this next diagram shows you the function of each of these things more specifically. So NNOS, neuronal nitric oxide synthase, optimizes neuronal synapses and has a neuroprotective effect. ENOS helps tissue recovery and regeneration and enhances blood flow, dissolves endothelium plaques in the arteries, dilates blood vessels. ENOS, the model of ENOS is currently the most accepted theory of why exercise has a cardioprotective benefit. One of the things that dramatically activates ENOS is circulation, blood flow. Okay? And one of the things that we know is that when you exercise and run and you start getting more pumping of your blood because your heart rate's going up, that circulation actually turns on the vascular endothelium ENOS system. And this, when the ENOS system gets activated, it actually dissolves plaquing over the arteries. It actually makes these blood vessels healthier. It gets rid of the inflammatory response, dilates the blood vessels so there's more perfusion in tissues. Okay? Really cool stuff. Now, this ENOS system is often compromised in autoimmunity, and if this ENOS system is compromised in autoimmunity and they can't get vasodilation and they can't get perfusion, how quickly are they going to heal? They're not. Okay? And then INOS promotes tissue destruction, promotes inflammation, and promotes these autoimmune attacks, right? So you have these three different isomers. And then, back to the basic concept. Don't use products that use arginine to raise NO with autoimmunity because it may increase the INOS. That in fact, that as soon as arginine is exposed to these isomer enzymes, it immediately turns them on. This is like a rate-limiting exposure. They get exposed to it, boom, they activate. So there's a difference between using specific support for nitric oxide synthase modulation than simple use of arginine to raise nitric oxide levels. Now, when you look at this system, what do you think is going on with autoimmunity? Do you think these, first of all, do you think their INOS system is activated? Absolutely. Their INOS system is activated. The Th1, Th2 dominance, the Th17, the cytokine surges are activating INOS, and this INOS system is a very destructive system. It's what's destroying their tissue, whether it's myelin or cartilage or whatever the case may be. How is their ENOS system? With your autoimmune disease patients, do you guys see cold hands and feet? Yeah, of course you do, right? You see their hair falling out, cold hands and cold feet. You see their nail beds all weak. You see the fungal toenail stuff because they don't have blood flow. They don't have perfusion. You guys show me an autoimmune disease person, I'll show you hair falling out and cold hands and feet and poor nail beds and all the things associated with failure of the ENOS system. When this system fails, their ability to recover from their autoimmune attacks is very poor. What do you think is going on with autoimmune diseases and an NOS system? It's probably not poor. You guys show me an autoimmune disease patient, I'll show you poor brain function. I'll show you a history of their brain function deteriorating over a period of time. So one of the things that we know is that when you look at autoimmune disease activity and expression, they're on the destructive side. They're doing all the wrong things. So this is another diagram, and you see the destructive aspect of nitric oxide isomer modulation. If their INOS system is up, they're going to have greater inflammatory destruction. If their ENOS system is down, they're going to have the cold hands and feet. And if their NNOS system is down, their brains are going to be functioning less than they were maybe as time has gone by. So and that's what you see with autoimmunity. Severe inflammation, severe destruction, cold hands, cold feet, inability to recover, poor brain function. So there's this adverse nitric oxide isomer expression. And these shifts of these isomers where INOS is up and ENOS is down and NNOS is down promotes tissue destruction, promotes inflammation, causes greater expression of autoimmunity, decreases blood flow to brain, hands, feet, sexual organs, decreases brain endurance, function, and focus, and has poor recovery from autoimmune attacks. And you guys, and part of autoimmune dysfunction is they have a tissue destruction process, so whatever you see the antibodies against, you know that tissue is being destroyed, but the cytokine, the autoimmunity itself, is changing these isomer responses so they don't have good blood flow, right? You guys, and the blood flow includes the gut epithelium. You guys understand the gut system itself? If you don't get poor blood flow to your tissues, you're not going to get good blood flow to your gut. Any tissue has a harder time recovering, and when you have these like leaky gut mechanisms, think about this. Autoimmunity, people have leaky guts, right? They have this very common to see that. We know that glutathione depletion directly leads to intestinal inflammation activation. We know that if they don't have ENOS, they can't recover their gut membrane, right? So this system is like absolutely critical for us to modulate and change for these disorders. Now, the goal that we should have to do is as you sit back and look at like, okay, what's the current understanding of autoimmune immunology? Well, we know there's a Th1, Th2, Th317 system, but we know the system is actually promoting INOS activity, causing destruction, and we know they can't heal until ENOS system goes up. We know that. So what's our clinical goal? We'll obviously modulate these Th1, Th2, Th317 systems, and then we want to increase their ENOS response. We want to dampen their INOS response, right? We want to increase their neuronal nitric oxide synthase response. That's the goal, right? And this is what we're going to get into. How can we do that from a therapeutic strategy? Let me show you some of these studies on these isomers and its relation to autoimmune disease and inflammation. This was a paper that was published in 2009, and the title of the paper is Nitric Oxide Mediated Intestinal Injuries Required for Alcohol-Induced Gut Leakiness and Liver Damage. So it's basically they're doing a study and seeing how alcohol destroys the liver and the intestinal membrane. Now, what they found is IONS upregulation and oxidation nitration of intestinal cytoskeletal proteins promotes intestinal leakiness, the so-called leaky gut, loss of increased gut permeability. We hypothesized that INOS inhibitors will inhibit the liver intestinal barrier cascade. So it gets back to the same thing. If INOS systems are up, you're going to have leaky guts. The glutathione system gets depleted, you're going to have leaky guts. If your ENOS system is not healthy, you can't regenerate the gut membrane. You know, really, really important. You guys, and people are just like living in the world of glutamine, which is okay because it has some influence, but you need more, right? You just need to really look at some of these integrated systems and see how they all work together. Nitric oxide is anti-proliferative for T cells and other immune cells. This is this ENOS activity. We conclude that NO inhibits expression of both Th1 and Th2 cytokines. That's the ENOS system. The endothelial nitric oxide system actually helps modulate this response. Here's another paper that was published. Nitric oxide has an established role in the defense against bacterial infections, exerts multiple modulatory activities in both inflammatory and immune responses. Our data suggests that it elicits distinct anti-inflammatory functions, eventually reducing T lymphocyte proliferation and recruitment. So if these isomers are modulated, again, you get decreased adverse immune responses. This was a paper that was published in 2006, Annals of Rheumatological Diseases, Role of Nitric Oxide in Regulation of T cell Function. On the basis of the results, the authors proposed that nitric oxide represents an additional signal for the induction of T cell subset response, contributing to the increasingly complex network of immune regulation essential for health and disease. And this is look at this paper title. This is immunoregulatory role of nitric oxide in Killman rat virus-induced autoimmune diabetes in DRBBB rats. This is published in 2004 Journal of Immunology. We conclude that nitric oxide plays a critical immunoregulatory role, and NO modulation, that's the key word, NO modulation, isomer modulation, may prevent the onset of autoimmune reactions. Pretty profound. Like they're showing this direct link. If you can decrease the NOS activity, increase the NOS, you can prevent the onset of the autoimmune disease. Right? So back to like, I have a little girl. She's 4 years old. What's going to happen to her? She can develop an autoimmune disease. So I know in addition to making her glutathione fit as possible, I got to make sure that her NO system is modulated in such a way that these things never turn on. Because for sure she's going to get exposed to severe stress, a food chain that's been manipulated by this genetic model, and she's going to get exposed to environmental pollutants like never before. This is all going to happen to her. But what's her system that can decrease the expression of these things, right? This is absolutely important. Now, they also go on to the study and say, together, these data include antioxidant modulation of nitric oxide may be feasible therapeutic tool to interfere with development of autoimmune diabetes. They actually go in there and use the word antioxidant. Natural medicine types of strategies may actually modulate these isomers. We'll talk about which specific ones in a second for this response. This was a paper that was published, Inducible Nitric Oxide Synthesis Activation by Interleukin-17. So if you guys remember, the Th17 pathway, T helper 17, produces interleukin-17. And the interleukin-17 is what activates inducible nitric oxide synthase, which causes tissue destruction. So here's what they find in this paper. Interleukin-17 is a pro-inflammatory cytokine involved in autoimmune disorders. The pro-inflammatory action of interleukin-17 depends considerably on its ability to trigger the expression of inducible nitric oxide. We propose IL-17 and NO modulation could be relevant forms of therapy for autoimmune disorders. This is where the immunology world is going. How do we modulate these isomers? Because these are the mechanisms for the destructive process of autoimmunity. Here's another paper. Our results suggest a rather protective role of NO induction and support the hypothesis of autoimmune diseases mitigating immune modulation role of NO. Guys, mitigating the onset of autoimmune disease with nitric oxide modulation. Because you guys, we're all going to be faced with a person with autoimmune disease that has several tissue autoimmune reactions. How do we potentially slow it down from becoming multiple tissue antibody reactions, right? How do we calm down this process? Guys, you're not going to calm down this process by trying to find the antigen forever. You're going to calm down this process by trying to pull out metals and then having you're going to calm this metal by modulating these NO isomers. Here's another paper, 2002, Nephron, published in Nephron, Role of Nitric Oxide in Inflammatory Conditions. NO inhibits cell proliferation via inhibition of polyamine synthesis and cell uptake and may well act as a brake on the proliferative response following cytokine exposure. NO plays a protective role with many forms of inflammatory and autoimmune reactions. This is referring to the ENOS system. And then one of these last papers here, NOS2, NO is the important silencing autoreactive T cells. It may restrict bystander autoimmune reactions following the innate immune response. May restrict bystander autoimmune reactions, development of one tissue antibody going to the next, right? So here's the thing. We look at a person with an autoimmune disease and go, okay, if we step out of the 1970s naturopathic model that they all need chelation, that they all need to find a specific antigen, and we go, they're right now suffering from an autoimmune disease, and based on these mechanisms, it will get worse, it will deteriorate, and it will go into more tissues, right? That the autoimmune reaction may go there, whether they have an autoimmune disease develop or not, it's still going to have suffering. Then we have to ask the question, what's the mechanism of their progression? What's going to determine if they have this destruction? And this is where we get to this Th1, 2, 3, 17 pathway. And then when we look at the system, what controls the system? It's the glutathione recycling integrity and the nitric oxide isomer modulation, right? So if we can employ clinical strategies to modulate these isomers, we can have some profound responses, okay? So one of the things that was developed is nitric balance. This was a formulation that took about 2 years to develop. Lots of testing, lots of different samples, and you guys, it is awesome. It is an amazing product, and this is a liquid product. And this is how. Yes, here's the thing with this nitric balance. It works best if a person drinks it, has a dose of it, and then they do physical activity. Because as they get their blood flow, they're going to activate ENOS. As they take the compounds that turn on these systems and modulate these isomers, you're going to have a much greater response. Does that make sense? And here's what you'll notice if you guys try it for yourself. If you guys take it, you're going to immediately feel blood flow like to your hands. If you're typing, you're going to go, wow, my hands are tingling, I remember the first batch, my wife's sister was taking it, and she was chewing gum. She's like, my lips are tingling. I mean, it's like blood flow goes right in there. Blood flow goes to all tissues, if you understand what I mean, all peripheral tissues. So there could be effects that way too. So, it's very obvious to see the response. But, this is, it's very noticeable that there was some immediate impact from using the dose. Now, if you guys work out and exercise, it's very immediate. You'll notice your endurance goes up. That if you run, it's like you could run for a longer time than ever before. Also, why is that happening? Because you're enhancing ENOS. You're getting all this blood flow to your tissues. Your muscle endurance goes up. You also notice that if you do heavy exercise and weight training, your recovery is so much better. Sometimes you do weight training, you get like all torn up and beat up the next morning, but you just don't see the same degree of that, and you can recover so much faster. So if you guys train really hard, you can immediately see how NO isomer modulation increases your performance and increases your recovery. And guys, and when you train really hard, you break down tissue. What's happening with autoimmunity? They're breaking down tissue. So you can see like the effects of it really quickly, even though you may not have an autoimmune disease. Now, for some of your autoimmune disease people, it's going to be profound. They're going to take it and just the whole system is going to calm down a little bit for them. They're going to feel a lot better. They're going to start having more energy. They're going to start getting blood flow. If they get blood flow, you'll see like their nail beds start getting healthier, their tissue perfusion, pulse ox readings start to get better, especially if they do it and then work out. You start seeing their hair stop falling out because they're actually getting blood flow to their scalp. And they just have better days than bad days, right? They have less bad days and they have more good days because they're getting this whole system quenched, right? So pretty important. Now, the things that have been shown to modulate these isomers are these following compounds. And the interesting thing about these is when they're all taken together, it is profoundly different. That you can't really do this with a capsule. That these have to be all use this emulsification process together to get the best effect. This is something that we've been doing for 2 years, and this is what we've noticed. Now, the goal of the nitric balance product is it provides compounds that are used to support the expression of ENOS and NOS while dampening the expression of INOS. That's the key thing. You guys, it's not arginine. You can't use arginine. It's not specific for these isomers. And then if we can increase these isomer modulation responses in a healthy way, that'll support tissue healing, it'll dampen tissue inflammation and destruction, and then modulate autoimmune reactions. Now, one of the key ingredients in there is adenosine. And here's the thing with adenosine. Adenosine doesn't get into the cell. It's extracellular when you take it, but that extracellular adenosine changes and activates extracellular ATP. Extracellular ATP immediately turns on ENOS and NNOS. And more importantly, it does not activate INOS activity and has also demonstrated to suppress INOS activity. Now, this stuff is all in the nitric balance product handout sheet research. You guys, I'm just summarizing these things for you, but they're all in there for you. But it's really interesting. You can read some of these papers. The other thing that we know is that this nitric oxide system to ENOS, to dampening INOS, is very much impacted by the acetylcholine nicotinic receptor. That if you do things that can raise the ENOS system like adenosine and then activate the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor, that you get a much more profound ENOS response. So there's several things that are included in this, like huperzine A. And if you guys look at some of these studies that are again, in your nitric balance product handout sheet, huperzine A is a powerful compound for ideal nitric oxide isomer expression. It supports acetylcholine activity necessary for ENOS, NOS, and it has powerful INOS inhibiting properties. This is the things that's been shown to do. Now, huperzine is a very popular botanical for Alzheimer's and dementia types of conditions. Part of the reason it's so effective is it increases blood flow by ENOS and dampens INOS, and it helps this acetylcholine system. That taken with things like adenosine and some of the other compounds have this very profound NOS modulating response. Huperzine is a potent natural acetylcholine esterase balancer, leading to increased acetylcholine activity that is necessary for ideal ENOS and NOS activity. In studies, huperzine A has demonstrated the ability to inhibit INOS activity directly as well as suppress the same cytokines that stimulate INOS. So think about this. You load them up with adenosine that has an extracellular ATP ENOS activating response. You give them a botanical that dampens INOS, clearly it's been published to do that, and increases ENOS, you're starting to get this isomer modulation the way you need to, to get the response you want. Now, another compound that's in this is vinpocetine. Vinpocetine is also written as venopectin, or however you want to say. So there's both spellings in your notes, but vinpocetine is in here. And vinpocetine, first of all, if you guys look at the literature on this, it's most commonly used for head injury and stroke recovery. That they've been using this, and they still do in Eastern Europe, for traumatic head trauma because it increases blood flow to brain. And there's some major published past studies on this the past few years. One of these studies, they took a group of head-injured people, they gave them vinpocetine, and they'd PET scans of their brains compared to a group that wasn't getting vinpocetine, and the group getting vinpocetine had blood flow go directly to the areas of trauma to the brain, that it has this profound specific effect of getting to the injured tissue. Now, we know that vinpocetine is known as a cyclic GMP phosphodiesterase inhibitor, or PD balancer. This is really critical for modulating ENOS systems. We know that vinpocetine has this net effect on PD inhibitors in the body. It shows to increase ENOS activity, leading to healthy vasodilation, blood delivery to peripheral tissues for recovery. And then in addition, vinpocetine properties of ENOS activation. The compound has very powerful influence of the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, all these things that increase ENOS. If you give them compounds that increase ENOS, once again, you're going to increase blood flow, tissue perfusion, healing, recovery. You need some anti-inflammatory, dampening of INOS. These are all the things that you want. Also, what's in the nitric balance is alpha GPC, and we know this has been shown to increase acetylcholine levels, promotes nitric oxide synthase activity, and promotes this whole ENOS system and dilation, and also enhances NOS system, so you get this greater brain function response. Alpha-ketogluteric acid is also in nitric balance. It is an intermediate in the citric acid cycle, and this helps produce nitric oxide via the urea cycle. It also helps metabolize harmful nitrogens out of the body. Now, one of the things you see with some of these chronic autoimmune disease people is you see their tissues deteriorating, their muscle mass deteriorating. That's when they have dysfunction in their nitrogen balance. And we also know that these isomer expressions really shift the protein nitrogen balance. And if this system goes the wrong way, you're going to see decay of all their muscle system, right? So, really common to see that. So when you modulate these isomers, you may have some positive influences on that. So alpha-ketogluteric supplementation has been shown to have positive modulating activities in INOS. It dampens INOS. AKG supplementation has been shown to help modulate nitrogen balance and preserve protein synthesis after cell injury. And then one of the things that's used to stimulate the nicotinic receptor, which is really critical for these isomer expressions, is xanthol nisinate. And this has demonstrated properties to actually raise the activity of ENOS. And acetylcholine activity. Clinical research found that xanthol nisinate has antioxidant properties that may lead to decreased INOS activities. Several research studies have found it improves microcirculation, aids in healing through the ENOS response. L-acetylcarnitine is a nitric balance. Research has shown that LAC mimics acetylcholine activity and has been shown effectiveness in acetylcholine-mediated pathways. And then lastly, acetylcarnitine promotes nitric oxide synthase activity. Nitric oxide promotes acetylcholine activity and is responsible for this whole ENOS, vascular dilation, and NOS synaptic activity promotion. So here's the thing. If you guys look at the formulation, you guys read the research on it, basically every ingredient in there has what you need. Dampens INOS, at the same time influences the production of ENOS and neuronal nitric oxide synthase. Now, when you put this stuff together in such a way where you're hitting the ENOS activation, giving them precursors like adenosine to raise it, and you fire into the acetylcholine nicotinic receptor with compounds, you get this profound synergistic nicotinic, acetylcholine, ENOS response, INOS dampening response. This is exactly what you need to modulate NO isomers. This has been one of the most profound compounds for my practice for autoimmune disease. This is why I'm so excited to share this information. Like, this has been huge for me, that the modulation of these systems. So let's put these two systems together. So we know that, two things to really help this whole autoimmune expression is review of this whole glutathione and nitric oxide system. So as we go through these diagrams in review, here's what we know the literature is showing us. Research being done in the toxicology world is showing us that The immune response to an environmental compound basically takes place when there's glutathione depletion. When the body fails to have recycling of reduced glutathione and there's only oxidized glutathione, that actually activates the immune response. What part of the immune response does it activate? It activates INOS. And what does INOS do? It causes tissue destruction and autoimmunity. So, when you look at autoimmune modulating properties, if you can increase glutathione recycling at the initiation of this, and then even if it does happen, you can quench INOS, you're really doing the things that are directly related to this immune mechanism, right? Which is profound. Now, we know that this glutathione recycling support product is designed to raise this product. We also know we have these different isomers of NO, and most of the people that we're seeing that have chronic autoimmune destructive processes are on this destructive side. Their INOS is too high, their ENOS and NOS is down. That's why they have the poor blood flow and tissue recovery and poor brain function and constant attacks. And we know that if we can do intervention that changes these isomers in a protective way, that we see improvements in their function and we see recovery that's much faster. We can immediately modulate their immune response. Does that make sense? It's not curing it. And these glutathione and nitric oxide systems, they're not necessarily specific for Th1 or Th2. Whether they're Th1 or Th2, they can go either way. Now, you guys may have all seen autoimmune disease people, and you're like, wow, I don't even know if I should challenge him. You shouldn't. And if they're like at a point where you can't challenge your Th1, Th2 system, like in the courses we've taught, some of you guys may have attended, we'll have a person with an autoimmune response that has some degree of helpness that can handle a flare-up, take Th1 support for a few days, like X-Viramin, see how they do, and then take XFLM for a few days, see how they do, and you kind of get to see what kind of response they may be reacting to. You get to understand their Th1, Th2 polarity. But some people, like, they're so progressed, you don't want to do this. Like, you would never want to do a Th1, Th2 challenge to a progressive MS person or anyone who can't afford a severe destructive process. And these things don't push the immune system any way. They're immune modulators. Does that make sense? It's a big difference. This is an area of safety. This is an area where you can do things and have profound impacts without really pushing one side or the other. Now, if you guys do challenge people and you see that they're fit, if you challenge them with a Th1, Th2 response, and you do this before, you're gonna skew your challenge. You may not see anything anymore because you've calmed down their whole immune response. So if you guys do challenges, you want to challenge them first, figure out their Th1, Th2, and then once you're done with that, that's when you start playing with this glutathione NO isomer modulation. Now, if they're not fit enough for a challenge, you jump right into this, right? Just to kind of put together some material for some of you guys that have been following our stuff. So let's review this. So do you guys remember this diagram? This is the thing we started with? Okay, so here's the thing. Yeah. So here is the key things when we look at autoimmunity. Their intestinal membrane mucosal health. Do they have any permeability? Do they have any leakiness, so-called, of their gut? Their immune activation. And then, do they have a Th1 or Th2 polarity? We know autoimmune disease do. That increases cytokines. We also know that the cytokine that's activated that really adds fuel to this fire is the INOS, and that fire is this Th17 system adds fuel to the fire, and the fire is INOS. So as Th1, Th2 cytokines go up, as Th17 as a cytokine goes up, we have this destructive tissue process. And one of the ways we can gate this is to get the regulatory T cells supported, right? So ideally, we want to increase the intestinal membrane integrity, dampen the Th1, Th2 response, increase the Th3 response, and then decrease the Th17 activity and the INOS system. That's exactly what glutathione and NO modulation has the promise potential of doing. This is a diagram illustrating the specific reactions here. And they're all numbered, and there's a key right here on the left-hand side. So, number 1, intestinal membrane mucosal immunity. Well, glutathione and NO enhance repair of the intestinal mucosa. That's huge. Number 2, antigen immune activation. Glutathione and NO dampen initial inflammatory responses, whether it adds a hapten or antigen. Number 3, as you look at this Th1, Th2 shift, glutathione and NO modulate Th1, Th2 shifts. Number 4, glutathione and NO support regulatory T cell activity that modulate Th1, Th2 shifts. Number 5, glutathione and NO dampen Th17 activity that promote tissue destruction. And then finally, number 6, as far as tissue destruction, glutathione and NO support tissue recovery. So this is really profound stuff. Guys, this has been like stuck in me for a long time, and I always like, oh, I got to tell people about this. Oh, we're not ready yet. Oh, I got to tell you it's not ready yet. It is so good to let this out, But it is one of the most profound ways that, from my practice, I've been able to calm down some of this response. I mean, it's not a world of cure. It's a world of calming this down, slowing it down, improving quality of life. You know, these two systems are really, really important. Now, as far as clinical applications, here's what I've noticed working with a lot of autoimmune disease people. Two biggest mistakes with autoimmune management. Number one, attempt to chelate environmental compounds without a stable glutathione recycling system, without nitric oxide modulation, and without intestinal membrane integrity. Right? That's like, you can't have those systems fail. You know what you could add to that is not just intestinal membrane integrity, but blood-brain barrier integrity. So think about this. A person who's got a breached blood-brain barrier, who's got a leaky gut, who's got failed glutathione recycling systems, and their INOS system is activated. Are you really going to chelate? Because if you guys look at the studies on DMPS or DMSA and EDTA, they all pull from one tissue and push into another. Right? And as if you increase these things in the blood and these systems are there to fail, there's a problem there. So like gut integrity, blood-brain integrity, glutathione recycling, NO isomers, they need to be healthy. You know, these systems really need to be there for them. And then the other biggest mistake is just focusing on finding and managing the antigen without modulating the immune system. So you see these people with autoimmune disease, they go, we're going to find your cause for your autoimmune disease. I think it's a parasite. I think it's a stealth pathogen. I think it's Lyme. I think it's this hidden virus. And they spend all this time looking for it, and as they look for it, their immune system is just flaring up and their bodies are being deteriorated, that there was no initial concept of trying to modulate. They're trying to find the antigen to what? Modulate. But you can go in there and specifically modulate these systems, right? The more fit the glutathione recycling system is, you get greater modulation. The greater isomer modulation you have, the less flare-ups you have, and more recovery you have. So these are things that can be done initially just to calm down some of this adverse response. Now, remember with autoimmunity, it's critical that you consider the following, like we've been talking about to summarize. Increase the Th3 activity. Those are the regulatory T cells that balance Th1 and Th2. Decrease Th17 activity. That's the major cytokine that fires into inducible nitric oxide synthase, which adds fuel to the fire for the autoimmunity. Modulate the Th1 and Th2 responses. Those are what are raising these cytokines that activate inducible nitric oxide synthase. And then optimize their intestinal membrane integrity. And then back to the summary, glutathione recycling and NO-modulation help with all four of these mechanisms, right? Because you guys, if you sit down, and this is what I've done, I've sat down and go, okay, this is the model for autoimmunity. Well, how do I impact these systems? And it's like, wow, two concepts can modulate all four of these things. And remember, like, you know, when you see autoimmune disease people, you guys see these patients in your office, how many supplements are they on? Guys, they're on bags and bags and bags of supplements. And they're not all recommended for the person that they're seeing. They're so desperate, they're trying to do anything they can to feel better. And they're trying to take one thing for all these things, to improve their life and their symptoms. But there's some things that you can do that have a profound direct impact on multiple systems, right? And glutathione NO-modulation will have a profound impact on autoimmunity in multiple systems. That's critical. So they may, like, for example, someone has an autoimmune disease, they're taking something for their nails because they heard like some minerals are good for their nails, and they're taking something for their skin flares up for their eczema, and they're taking something for their joint pain, they're taking something for whatever, and it's like, wow, if the whole autoimmunity is there, you dampen that could be great, because you could have a person that has like skin epithelium antibody, has flare-ups, they're having poor blood flow, they have skeletal muscle antibodies, have muscle aches and pains, they have all these different autoimmune reactions, they're trying to treat each symptom at the same time. They don't realize that if they dampen their autoimmunity, that all these things can potentially change. They don't know if they can increase their immune system, they will have increased recovery no matter which tissue is being destroyed, right? So strategies that have multiple effects on systems. That's what we're trying to do here. Now, you guys, in addition to this whole glutathione recycling and NO-modulation, two additional things to consider. Vitamin D, high dose, Ultra D complex, 2,000 IUs of vitamin D per serving. High dose vitamin D, we're talking about at least 8,000 IUs, which would be like 2 teaspoons in the morning, 2 teaspoons at night. Those dramatically increase regulatory T cell activity, and they help the intestinal membrane heal. They help with leaky gut issues. So those are something to consider adding to it. And one of the things that Apex has just made is this product called RepairVite. Many of you guys are familiar with ClearVite, which is the 3-week detox protocol. When people have severe leaky guts, they can't handle your typical medical food or ClearVite or metabolic powder. They just can't do it. They can't even handle the rice protein. They can't even handle some of the nutrients in there. This just doesn't work. So one of the things that we had to organize was this product called RepairVite, and RepairVite has no protein in there. There's no rice flour in there or any kind of starch in there, because people that have leaky guts, they can't handle it. Most of your metabolic powders or medical foods out there are just loaded, and the first ingredient there's rice protein. It's the most common ingredient. These people just are too progressed to even handle that. So this RepairVite protocol, it's a program it consists of a very restricted dietary program, much more restricted than ClearVite, much more restricted than your detox protocols. And there's also nutritional supplements recommended for 10 days to address the intestinal inflammation and help restore the intestinal membranes. The program may be conducted for 30 to 60 days for more progressed cases, and can be conducted for as few as 3 days for quick recovery after exposure to intestinal food sensitivity. So here's a basic program. The basic length of this RepairVite program is 10 days. So when they go on this formulation of this product, they get a little booklet. It tells them how to eat to help heal the leaky gut. And then they have this RepairVite powder they take twice a day. That's done for 10 straight days. Okay? For people that have average leaky guts, this can be very useful for them. For people that have more severe leaky guts, 10 days may not be enough. They may need to go into 20 days, so they do 2 cycles of this. For some of those that are very severe, they just may need more than 20 days. There's a 30 days. Now, for your really chronic, severe leaky guts, there's multiple mechanisms. We're going to get into that in our 2-hour talk, the neuroendocrinology of chronic leaky gut syndrome. And then the other thing that's in here is this acute repair program. People that have like chronic autoimmune diseases and chronic gluten sensitivities and chronic celiac and these types of things, every now and then they're going to get exposed to some food that flares them up, and they're going to have their leaky gut developed just from the inflammation. So they're also taught that, if you get a flare up, you do this program for 3 days just to recover, and it could be more than 3 days for you or whatever it is, but they learn to heal the leaky gut. They learn how to support the leaky gut if they get a flare up, so they can calm down their whole autoimmunity, right? Because if these membranes are compromised and these peptides get through, they then trigger the immune response. Now, the RepairVite regimen requires a very strict diet. I'll share with you in a second here to support the intestinal membranes. The dietary restrictions are not caloric, so they're not starving. They can eat as much as they want, so it's not a deprivation diet of calories. And then they would only list from the allowed foods. Now, the foods they have to avoid in this are sugars, like corn syrup, honey, any kind of candy. They have to avoid high glycemic fruits. Not all fruits are okay. The high glycemic fruits are not allowed in this program. They have to go off all grains. They can't go on buckwheat. They can't go on spelt. They can't go on any kind of flour. No grains. Okay, at all. They have to go off, obviously, gluten and dairy and soy-containing things, no alcohol. Another key thing is they can't have lectins. Lectins are major promoters of leaky gut, and lectins include nuts, beans, soy, potato, pepper, peanut oil, soy oil, any of these things. These things are all major inflammatory reactions, and people that have leaky guts can't handle those. No coffee, no processed foods, no canned foods. So what can they eat? Most vegetables. Okay, except tomato, potatoes, and mushrooms. These are in the whole nightshade lectin family. And here's what they want. You guys want to eat? You guys want to eat fermented food. You want to have sauerkraut, kimchi, pickled ginger, mixed pickle, coconut yogurt, kombucha tea. These things are all fermented. They help the leaky gut heal. Meats in this program are okay. Remember, this is not a detox program. This is an intestinal membrane healing program. So chicken breast, fish, beef, these are okay. Now, beef you got to be careful with from a detox issue, but at this point we're trying to heal the gut. Low glycemic fruits instead of the high glycemic ones. Coconut itself is very supportive for healing the gut. Coconut oil, coconut butter, coconut milk, herbal teas, olive oils, and olives. Those would be great things for them. So there's some like some little menus there. So you guys, most people can eat some like chicken and some vegetables, but not nightshade vegetables, right? Have some fermented compounds, have some low glycemic fruits for 10 days and be okay, right? Now, most of you probably would feel better doing this for 10 days. What I'm doing in my practice now is for people that have autoimmunity, I'm going right into the RepairVite, and I'm doing that for 1 or 2 cycles. And then for people that don't have autoimmunity, I'm still doing this with them for 10 days, and then I go into the ClearVite program. So what I do is I do RepairVite for 10 days, I go right into the 3-week ClearVite program, and that combination is much better. Fix your leaky gut really aggressively, and then go into the ClearVite. The ClearVite program is more of a detox, where you actually have things to push liver detoxification and clearance, and the diet is not as restrictive, so it's easier for them to go through. Guys, you take any chronic person, you put them through RepairVite for 10 days, and then ClearVite for 21 days, you should see some improvement. You do that in combination with modulating the glutathione and O systems, giving them some vitamin D, you're really starting to calm down this inflammatory autoimmune response for the mechanisms we know. Now, the Repair Vite, it's done as a powder. It's 1 serving twice a day. And we also have something called a comprehensive Repair Vite program. This is the most efficient way to do it. And it's Repair Vite, the powder, and the diet, plus a probiotic called Stringthia. Now, there's several strains of probiotics that can actually bypass and stay alive as they go through the pH of the stomach. And those are the ones you want to use to inoculate the colon. Because if you see probiotics that are refrigerated, you already know they're not going to work. Because the pH of the stomach is going to destroy them. They're so sensitive to temperature, there's no way they can handle the journey they need to go to inoculate the colon. This is one of the things we're learning about probiotics, that you'll have less effect with some of these. So there's some strains of probiotics. You guys can read the Stringthia sheet there. They've all been shown to be able to handle the stomach pH. They're very resistant to the journey it takes to get to the colon, so they can actually inoculate the colon. There's also large frabinogalactans in there. That's very important for getting this immune system modulated in the gut to heal. Those are all in there. These are little capsules. 1 capsule is about 30 billion live cultures. So, these people only take like maybe 1 or 2 capsules a day to have this really, really healthy probiotic promoted situation. And then one of the other things that we have in this comprehensive Repair Vite program, which can be done, or you can just do the basic one, is these little packets called GI Synergy. And the GI Synergy is it comes like in a bottle, but there's like 30 packets in there. And each packet has antibacterial compounds, anti-yeast fungal mold compounds, and like pathogen, basic parasitic, natural compounds. Because one of the things that we know is that when people have leaky gut, that they have this vicious cycle. When they get this leaky gut syndrome, they get yeast overgrowths. And these yeast overgrowths then promote the leaky gut. They get bacterial overgrowths. Those bacterial overgrowths promote the leaky gut. They get malabsorption, malnutrition. They get this dysbiosis activity, and these adverse bacteria produce lipopolysaccharides, which then promote leaky gut. So we have all these different vicious cycles there. So if we can engage in a more comprehensive protocol, like Repair Vite, Stringthia, and GI Synergy all together, that we can kind of get rid of these pathogens, get their probiotic system healthy, and turn around this whole leaky gut syndrome. So, what I do for myself is this comprehensive protocol. I'll have a patient go on this restricted diet for 10 days, take the Repair Vite to heal. At the same time, twice a day, they're taking a probiotic, high dose, that can actually inoculate the stomach. And then they're taking these packets that'll get rid of the yeast bacterial overgrowth from a natural Modicin type concept, and then trying to kind of unwind this leaky gut. As they're doing that, I'll go in there and do the NO modulation, glutathione type of support, put them on some D, and I'm just trying to calm this whole thing down. Does that make sense? For autoimmune people, I also do this whole Th1, Th2 challenge, but this is my initial goal, right? And then they learn how to use the product when they have flare-ups. Now, if you guys get a chance to read the Repair Vite formulation, there's many things in there. There's natural mucilage compounds to soothe and promote intestinal healing. There's plant sterols in there to modulate the enteric nervous system. There's natural compounds to reduce intestinal discomfort. There's phytochemicals in there to support intestines during inflammation. There's plant sterols to help with gut motility. There's glycoproteins to support healthy gut mucosa membranes. And there's basic nutrients to support regeneration and restoration of the system. So, these people that get these leaky guts, they get sensitivity of foods. They get multiple food sensitivities. They get exposed to this, and they have this reaction. We know that these current medical foods out there, even Clearvite, is just not enough for progressed leaky guts. The dietary restrictions aren't strict enough. They can't handle any grains, including rice protein, that they really need to take it to the next level. And this is what we're using for that. Okay, so let's put this all together. Person walks into your office with an autoimmune reaction or an autoimmune disease. Here's some things you know. It will get worse for sure. It will get worse for sure. How fast, you don't know. And more than likely, it will go into multiple tissues, at least the autoimmune reaction. May not be autoimmune diseases to other tissues, but you're definitely going to see autoimmune reactions. Okay? So a current model would be like, when you see an autoimmune disease person, one of the things you may want to consider doing right away would be like this 96 tissue antibody array from Cyrex, so you can then, where's this going? You can monitor them every few years. Are more tissues getting involved or less tissues getting involved, right? That's from like a laboratory perspective. Then you go, okay, well, they have an autoimmune disease. What's involved with autoimmunity? what's going to determine their tissue destruction, what's going to determine the recovery, and this goes back to this Th1, Th2, Th3, and 17 system. So we know we can modulate this with the glutathione recycling and the NO isomer system, right? So we know we can do that to kind of calm this thing down. So to do that, initially, step one, glutathione recycler, nitric balance, ultra D complex, vitamin D, and these things start gating and dampening this immune responsiveness. And the glutathione recycler, the thing with that is they take enough to notice the difference. It's going to be different from one person to the next. The nitric balance, the best way to do this is usually like once a day, but they do it right before before they work out. If they don't work out, just like going for a walk around the block after they take it would also be great. Assuming they have the ability to walk around the block, you know. If they can't, then they can't. But, you know, it'd be best with some physical activity, okay? You get a much more profound response because as that circulation goes on, you start turning on ENOS. If you have the nicotinic, acetylcholine, ENOS, and adenosine, all those things together, as you increase circulation, you get this longer lasting nitric oxide modulating effect. And then step two, you know, these people have this permeability issue, and a comprehensive program with the Purified Strength and GI Synergy can all be used to potentially break down this whole leaky gut vicious cycle, and then to modulate this Th1, Th2, Th3, Th17 system. Make sense? The explosion of autoimmune disease is insane, and the commonality of autoimmune reactions are everywhere. Thank you guys for coming, and hopefully you got something out of it.